Call the Senate Appropriations Committee to order. Good morning, everybody. Thanks for the members for their attendance. We will start today's hearing with the Pennsylvania State System of Higher Education, and with us today is our Chancellor, Dr. Daniel Greenstein. Doctor, thank you very much for your participation today. For purposes of background, in the governor's budget for our review and consideration, he is proposing for our state system of higher education, state universities, a $490 million appropriation. Last year's appropriation was $477 million. Also our consideration, which will be part, I think, of the conversation regarding all of higher ed, is a $204 million proposal for a new scholarship program. No wide tuition program. It was part of his proposal that will be relevant for all, I believe, for all our higher ed conversations. Before we begin, Chancellor, can I ask you to stand and be sworn, please? Swear the testimony you're about to give is the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth. Please swear affirm. Thank you. We will start as we have in the past, 10 minutes for standing committee chairs and then 5 minutes for members. But ask the members to do their best, make their best efforts to stay within the time so everyone can participate. A lot of issues that are relevant to this conversation, so we just want to make sure we can do our best to respect our testifiers' time. So we will start with Standing Committee Chairman Senator Langerholtz for 10 minutes.
If I may, Mr. Chairman.
Yes, Senator Hughes.
Before the Chancellor gets underway, I want to publicly thank him for
that's right.
What I thought was a very engaging conversation, a thoughtful conversation with the Pennsylvania Higher Education Funding Commission. And I know a few of us sit on that. I brought the document that you handed out at that commission, and I think I will use it to guide some of our thoughts and conversations here, but in other spaces. But I remember very succinctly, I think the agreed to point, which is what do we want to achieve? What do we want our goal to be? And I think we just all need to be mindful of that in that set, because this conversation is very relevant to what was discussed there. So I want to just put that on the record, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Senator Hughes. I'm sorry, I was remiss in honoring your request to have 3 minutes for an opening statement. Would you like that?
That would be great.
All right, thank you. Go ahead. You may proceed.
Thank you so much, Chairman Brown, Chairman Hughes. So last year when I was here, I promised that we would address 5 of your key concerns: accountability, transparency, student affordability.
Chancellor, do you have your mic on?
Aligning our cost. Last year when I was here, I promised we would address 5 of your key concerns: accountability, transparency, student affordability, aligning our costs with our revenues, and getting our arms around our low-enrolled universities. We have delivered on every single one of those promises, every single one, making demonstrable progress in each area that they address. We have made progress, too, in overcoming organizational and cultural challenges, including difficult internal divisions between the administration and our unions, specifically our faculty union, ABSCUF, and between universities who are moving from a collection of competing institutions to institutions that will willingly help one another programmatically and financially so that they all may thrive in service to their students, their communities, and this state. And we are making real progress against some of the negative narratives that are out there about a dysfunctional system with a history of a weak and ineffective board and an unresponsive and opaque chancellor's office. And I also said last year when I was here that having addressed those concerns that I would return with specific requests of you, our partners in the General Assembly. Why? Because public higher education is a partnership between universities and the state. One piece of that request is represented by a package of bills introduced in the House last month that seek critical reforms to our enabling legislation, Act 188. And you will find the second piece of that request in our appropriations submission. It includes A 2% increase in our operating budget. That is the cost to carry the system. And it is essential to our continuing commitment to student affordability. It includes a $20 million one-time ask, the first installment of 5 years of one-time funding that are needed to modernize the system's infrastructure in the interest of significant savings, but more importantly, to expand opportunities. Expand opportunities for students who will be able to access the breadth of educational programs across the system from no matter what university they enroll. Opportunities for adults who are seeking to reskill and upskill so that they can remain viable in the labor market. And for employers and communities who are looking for partners to help them fill roles in high-demand occupations. In order to redesign ourselves into the public higher education system that the people of this Commonwealth need, we have asked for what we need, based on budgeting that I am able this year and willing to stand behind and represent. And while we seek additional investment in the system, this is not just about the system. As I said last week in my testimony to the Higher Education Funding Commission, this is about the health and well-being of this Commonwealth. It is about ensuring that 60% of Pennsylvania adults have the education they need after high school that is required to meet our workforce needs. Where are we today? We are at 47.5%. How are our universities and colleges across the state doing in addressing that gap? They are moving backwards, credentialing fewer, not more graduates every year. This is a problem. It is our problem, and it is our duty together to face it. How we address it, our partnership, will be our legacy. And I look forward to the conversation. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Chancellor. We will now turn to our standing committee chairs, starting with Senator Langerholtz for 10 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Good morning, Chancellor. Thank you for being here. Thank you for that opening statement. And I want to focus on one area here at the outset and understanding, where you're coming from and understanding what your vision is. I appreciate your packet that you put together here for us this morning. The 10-year trend, and I'm certain you're very familiar with this. In 2010, there were almost 120,000 students, and now the 10-year trend, 2019, that's a reduction of 20% in students. Now, at that same time, as I look through your numbers, there's only been a reduction of 4% in instructors. Okay, it does not correlate well with where we're at in that 10-year trend. Also, what concerns me is and I'm referring to Appendix A7 of your document. In 2010, there were 84,000 applicants, and in 2018, there were 64,000 applicants. And of those applicants in 2010, the acceptance rate was 61%. 10 years later, there are 20,000 fewer applicants, but yet you're admitting almost 84%. With the projected downturns in enrollment, I don't think that's any secret here. What are we doing to address, and I understand your outline here for your requests and how to streamline different services. And I guess another question on top of that would be, of those streamlined services, do you anticipate a reduction in less labor costs and or a reduction in instructors to kind of correlate with that reduction in the students that are coming? But other than that, how are you addressing these? I mean, that seems to me to be the very real, the number one issue here. I mean, we can talk about sharing services, doing things, but at the end of the day, we are not having more students attend these universities. And of the less that are applying, more are getting in, but even less are going or are coming that are being admitted. So what is your outline for those specific areas?
So I'm going to unbundle, and let me talk about aligning our costs with our revenues with specific reference to personnel costs, and then let me talk about the enrollment acceptance trends, because they're different But let me start with the key question, which is having to do with our employee headcount. Let me give you the numbers. I think what's referenced in the book is headcount. I'm going to give you annualized FTE. It's probably it's a better, more robust number. So our enrollments have dropped 19.3% since 2010, during which time our total employee FTE has declined by 5.9%. If we remove Westchester University, which has actually grown in enrollments, right, so just pull it out for a moment, the enrollments at the other 13 universities have declined 27.8%, and the employee FTE has declined 9.5%. So either way, this is, to your point, this is not a good pattern in an organization, any organization, especially one where 75% of the costs are tied up in salary and benefits. Thing one. Thing two, as with every organization, our most important resources are people, our employees. In our case, it's our faculty and our staff. So we are taking every action to ensure that we are able to manage our personnel costs, to address the issue that you've just raised and the data that I've just given you, in a way that minimizes disruption for our students, is respectful of our faculty and our staff, and that gets us to a stable and sustainable financial situation as quickly as possible. So 3 actions in particular have been taken in the last year. The first, we work collaboratively with our collective bargaining units to negotiate contracts that are fiscally responsible and fair, and that they give us a wider range of tools to address personnel issues with humanity and compassion for both our students and our employees. And I want to acknowledge the hard work in particular of our faculty union, ABSCUF, in that very collaborative process over the summer. 2, we introduced an enhanced sick leave payout plan for faculty that is intended to boost the number of annual retirees to at least 200. And if we are successful in achieving that target, 200, we will relieve enormous pressure to reduce faculty headcount by other means, notably through retrenchment. 3, we introduced a sustainability policy. The board approved a sustainability policy in October that requires universities to operate sustainable, balanced budgets. In its implementation this year, I have instructed presidents as a matter of urgency and working collaboratively with each other and with constituencies on their campus to take a number of actions. Curtail the use of temporary faculty, using permanent faculty wherever possible in instruction, including faculty from other universities. Consolidate existing roles, including at the executive level, and including consolidation of roles across 2 or more universities. Hire only essential positions, giving consideration in doing that to faculty and staff, including faculty and staff at other universities that may be at risk of losing their jobs. And eliminate or consolidate low enrolled programs, including through consolidation of programs across universities. And finally, to do all this, working closely and transparently with our union leaders in developing sustainable budget plans. Our success in doing this last action, it's going to require an unprecedented level of collaboration with our faculty union, with ABSCUF, which has contractual authority in several of these areas. And it is going to require close collaboration amongst our universities. And this will stretch us. But I am confident we are ready, and I know, as you do, that it is time, because the numbers that you portrayed need to be addressed now. So thank you.
Can we expect to see any kind of reduction in instructor staff when we're here next year at these? I mean, are you going to continue to work with that to correlate?
Yeah, as we have seen the
instructor?
trend line, and the trend line I hope will hopefully begin to accelerate through attrition and whatever other means are available to us. This, the actions that we are taking under the sustainability, policy are actions that have been needed for years. Time is now. The future of this Commonwealth, the future of our students, the future of our communities that we serve depends on our ability to stabilize ourselves so that we can grow and invest in the future.
Thank you. Along those lines, within your materials, the new fall undergraduate transfer students. I'm going to draw your attention specifically to community colleges and dealing with articulation agreements. And there was some legislation, I believe, was sponsored by Senator Ahmed, I think back in 2017, which would maybe eliminate some of the barriers for students that can transfer credits from a community college to the state system.
Yeah.
And within that chart, I note that it is down the numbers of transfers, and there's only 3 community colleges that saw positive transfer numbers over a 10-year period. And I say that specifically, Penn Highlands Community College, which is located within my district, has seen an increase in that 10-year period, but they're only one of 3 community colleges that have had more transfer students go to a state system than at other community colleges. Are there still barriers to that, or maybe the correct answer to that is that, are those numbers, because those numbers are down in the community college, is that just because representative of the overall trend in the decline in enrollment, or can you break that out, I guess would be another question, to say, yes, we know that our enrollment is 20% down, and that's going to be reflective in the community college, but we can tell you, are there more students transferring from community colleges to the state system?
Yeah.
Are these articulation agreements working,
Yeah.
or are there additional
Yeah.
barriers to those transfers?
Yeah, no, that's I appreciate the question. There's been a lot of anecdote flying around recently, so let's address it with some facts. So the first thing is that our enrollments of transfer students from community colleges typically track with community college enrollments. So community college enrollments are overall down 13.3%, right? Since 2013, our enrollments since 2013 of community college transfer students are down around 16%. So there's a little bit of a difference, but it pretty much tracks with that trend line. We do have, so that's thing one. We actually have a program-to-program agreements, hundreds of them, and they're university to college agreements. They're specific to a university and a college, and they're specific to a program. Business administration would be an example. So that the student begins at the community college on a path which is defined by faculty working together from both colleges that track to a particular, a BA degree through transfer. Students who follow that path at community college transfer in as juniors to the host university, which is participating in that program. So how successful is that? 93% of all credits presented by a community college transfer student actually are accepted at their host institution, at their destination institution. That's up over the last 3 or 4 years from 88%. It's a positive trend. Good thing. Transfer students graduate at a higher rate than our native freshmen. They're good students, good thing. Transfer students tend to take 1 or 2, in some places it bounces around year on year, college by university, 1 or 2, sometimes 3 courses more than our native freshmen in completing their degrees. So there's issues there that could be addressed. But on balance, and when you compare that with what is happening nationally, those are pretty good signs. Is there room for improvement? Absolutely, particularly with regard to the online options. Any number of community college students are taking, a large number, are taking online courses, and they are less likely to want to move from an online experience to the AA degree into an on-ground experience, right? And so aligning our online undergraduate programs with online community college programs is room, in my view, for improvement.
Thank you, Senator Engelholz. We'll turn to Senator Dinniman for 10 minutes.
Good morning, Chancellor, and thank you, Mr. Chairman. Let me bring out 4 questions. I think that can be a basis for our further questioning today. First, you noted that there's a 4.5% increase. There are no steps that are, the steps been eliminated because the steps will provide a further increase that are, I believe, automatic based on a number of years. So is it really 4.5%? And second, if there was if, as you say, we needed to address issues for a long time, and if you talk about fiscal responsibility, I'm trying to build on the questions that my majority chair has asked here and get more specific. If there is no increase for any institution in your budget and everything goes centrally, how can the universities that are already stressed absorb the costs of the 4.5% plus any steps that are there that are contractual? Also, I understand that, and I agree with you, that we need to get faculty to teach across campuses, etc. As you know, these will be grieved, and grievances will hold things up. So the question is, why did the state system negotiate a contract that allows 4.5 plus steps and that did not take care of these central questions of the sharing of faculty when they had a chance to do so, and yet at the same time say to each university, too bad, you're going to absorb the cost and we're not giving you any more money because it's all going to the central system. Second, I would raise the question that on this $254 million for scholarships, I wish it was as simple as as has been said. The money in the horse racing trust is in a trust fund. The legislation specifically says this is not Commonwealth money, and that, and in fact, there's a penalty in there if you try to take the money out, which will cost $340 million more than the $204 million, and to play this game of thinking students are going to get these scholarships, they'll never get it next year because they'll be taken to court. And the last time a trust fund was taken to court was the medical trust fund, and the Commonwealth lost. So I wonder what your feeling is on that. And thirdly, what I think we need to address is this whole matter of credentialing. Everything that I've seen and studied over the last year as a Woodrow Wilson Fellow, just as you were, says that the greatest need in this Commonwealth is the skills of what are called middle skills. Those skills that might not even require college if we had a good high school training and vocational technical system. That's what employers are asking for. An individual who has digital knowledge and who could change. The need is not for PhDs, though we have to produce a certain number if we're going to be an innovative economy. That's one level of skills, innovative skills. Higher level skills are important, but we've met those needs. What we haven't met, and I hope that this committee will understand, is the needs that our employers are asking us. Those are the needs of people who have the technical knowledge and skills, who are taught to have the adaptability of change that might require community college or technical institute. And if we had a good high school system and with dual enrollment, we could bear those people in the high schools. So I think the question we have to ask is how much money should go to what and where? And what is the employee need? So those are the three questions. If we could start with, does the 4.5% include steps?
Yeah, I'm gonna, if you forgive me, I'm gonna just adjust the order. With the horse racing trust, this is something obviously you're gonna need to take up with the governor's office. It's, I do think, as we discussed at the Higher Education Funding Commission, Pennsylvania has a student affordability crisis. It is the second least affordable state for higher education in the country. It has the highest level of student debt, 37,000 compared to 29,000, I think, is nationwide. It has the highest proportion of students with student debt. And this is debilitating because it will undermine our ability to develop the workforce we need to keep the lights on in the economy. I mean, this is the issue.
But we shouldn't be giving hope when the hope is not going to be for next year, and it's not going to impact the budget for next year because the horse racing people have already said they're taking this to court. And courts can take a good year or so to come up with their determination. So let's be real. What we tell students, it might happen, but it might not happen. And for us to assume that 1/4 of our students are going to go to the state universities tuition free and room and board free, and that's going to increase our enrollment, and that's part of our budget, is a question that needs to be thoroughly answered.
So that is not part of our budget, and I have not seen any of our communications to students which would in any way reflect.
Well, you haven't
what
done it
just
yet,
said.
but it's certainly out there, and it's certainly then what you're saying is then we do not consider then any of this scholarship money as part of what we would do and consider in what a proper budget would be for SHE, because you're not suggesting it.
Thank you for that comment. On credentialing, credentialing requirements after high school, the Lumina data that, as you know, were reported at the Woodward Wilson Fellowship Program say, and I used them in my opening statement, and I used them at the Higher Education Funding Commission, that in order to keep the lights on in the economy of Pennsylvania, 60% of our adults will need some education after high school,
Of course.
Currently, which means that high school can address some of the problem, but it does not fill the gap between 47.5% and 60% of credentialed individuals.
And
the
much
only way
of
to
that
fill that
credentialing need is not higher skills, but is the basic skills provided by technical schools and community colleges, and that's what our employers are saying again and again. So when we develop a budget, we have to take that into consideration to get to the 60%. We have to look at each part of higher education, including SHE, which does a great job in terms of higher skills.
And as we spoke at the Higher Education Funding Commission, there's no map between skill level and credentialing requirement. And I mean, it's just unfortunate. I feel badly that you were taken down the skills path in the Higher Education Funding Commission before me. It is very interesting. Skills are important. It's what people can do. It's kind of the competencies that they have. But that doesn't map into credentials that align with pathways. So I would urge us to shift our attention there. Those credentials are going to have to come from all over the higher education ecosystem.
Absolutely.
And as we spoke at the Higher Education Funding Commission, creating pathways between institutions, creating connectivity between institutions so that student learners, working learners can evolve over time. You know, it goes back to the community college question. We have a mentality in this state, and not uniquely in this state, where we're still playing the game of the 1960s, where institutional segments put their arms around a particular group of students and workforce outcomes, and they say mine. And then we compete with each other basically for funding. I mean, that's old thinking. It's not what I'm familiar with nationally in higher education. I'm new to Pennsylvania, so I'm new to the dialogue here. Frankly, I've been a little bit surprised by how jealously guarded those prerogatives seem to be. It flies in the face of what our students and employers need. They need clearly articulated pathways that allow them to come in and out of the workforce and education through time.
Well, absolutely, but where in this budget is there that says the system is going to adjust itself so that if a new technology comes, that university is ready for that new technology, and our faculty and our negotiated contract is one that is agile and accepts that as a factor, and that's what I'm not seeing. But what I'm most interested in, I think is important for the commission to know, does the 4.5 include steps that increase salary or not include steps? Because it's not 4 and 4 and 5 if they're automatic steps, which you get based on how many years of service you do, and does it include promotions which put people into new step categories because you automatically go up in your salary based on the step. And in addition to the 4.5, 2% 1 year, 2.5% the next year, that's added on to the step.
So thank you for explaining that. So the contracts overall follow a pattern. Obviously, as you know, we're only responsible for the contracts that we're responsible for. AFSCME is negotiated statewide. As is one other, which is right out of my head. Most of the contracts that we negotiated, with the exception of the police, which is small and different in a variety of ways, follow a similar pattern. It was a 0% in this 0% in the first year, 2.5% in the second year, and then in the out years it was 2 or 2.5. I can't remember, 2 or 2.5% with a step. And if I got that wrong, I mean, and it varies because we have a lot of collective bargaining units.
Well, what would be good to get back
to answer your question,
to
sir.
us, Mr. Chancellor, sir, is what is the steps part of this, and what does the steps add to the total responsibility of each university, which is getting no money in your budget? All is going to centralization, which creates a problem. I just want to know what the answer is.
Budget, as you know,
steps are almost automatic.
The budget, as you know, for next year. It's not for the out years. Next year, the average pay increase, if you take AFSCME out, is 2.5%.
Thank you. Thank you, Senator Dinniman.
And thank you, Senator Brown.
Thank you. We'll move on to members of the committee, starting with Senator Mensch for 5 minutes and then Senator Schwank.
Good morning, Chancellor. Pardon me. Chancellor, one of my legislative responsibilities is to chair something called the Legislative Budget and Finance Committee, and it is a bicameral, bipartisan commission or committee that deals with legislative requests for studies, analyses. And back in 2018, one of the requests was to look at the PASHE system and make some recommendations. The scope of the project went beyond just the committee's ability, so we contracted with a corporation, RAND Corporation, to do the analysis. And they came back with a report on April 28th of 18 with 5 recommendations. Actually, what they said was 5 possible options for change. And that's directly from the report. No one on the committee had a dog in the fight, if you will. We were looking for an objective report, one that the legislature and the agency, in this case the state system, could take and begin to chew on and see whether there were recommendations that were possible. I'm interested in, now 2 years later, your take on that.
Yeah. I'm very familiar with the RAND report. I read it on the plane as I was coming out here for interview.
I recall that.
At that time. A couple of things. Actually, the RAND and then the report commissioned by the board that came out maybe the year before from NCHEMS, very similar. They use the same data. They come to largely similar conclusions. Very influential in creating our strategy, to be perfectly honest.
You say it was?
It was, absolutely, yeah. Because when we built our strategy and then we produced it, I guess, a year ago in January, it was basically designed around we penciled out all of the options that were on the table. And we looked at the various opportunities and costs in following any one of those. The reason we came up with the sharing system was to recognize the fact that our universities have very different needs and very different trajectories with respect to the different populations that they serve, but also that the political authority for the to execute the many of the recommendations in the RAND report, closure and consolidation, is not an authority that the board has. There's a piece of legislation in front of you now, House Bill 2171, which would give the board that authority. But those authorities were not and it has not seemed to me that the General Assembly has. And don't take this critically, I'm not meaning it in this term, but it doesn't have the political will, or honestly, and again, don't take this critically, it's not intended.
Candor is always a good thing, sir.
It doesn't have the expertise, the closeness to the ground to take those decisions in a way that would be, meaningful and helpful to pursue the kind of goals that we share in common, which is why one of the bills seeks that responsibility for the board.
Can I ask
but in that nexus, then, the way to evolve to ensure high quality, affordable education for all of Pennsylvanians was to evolve a system which knows how to share. So the investments that we're seeking are to build that system.
So let me ask you, back to your comment about the political will. What, in being only LBFC,
Yep.
Legislative Budget,
Yeah.
not on the Education Committee, so I may be outside of some of these conversations, but what, if anything, has the system done interactively with the legislature, or the legislature done interactively with the system, to have these discussions that you categorize as lacking in political will? And I recognize that's probably a reality.
Yeah, so we have worked very closely with a variety of committees, the Education Committee, both houses, both chambers. We have worked obviously very intensively with the PASHE caucus. We have worked very intensively with individuals. I spend a great deal of time in this building with you and other members of both chambers and their staff. Working together. This is a joint project. Public higher education is a partnership. I also, let's play I hate to do this, but let's play chancellor for a day, and let's close a campus. I'm not going to tell you one, but I'm going to use real numbers. So let's close a campus. The closing down costs are $250 million, right? You're probably left with between $100 and $150 million of bonded indebtedness. Interest payments run between $7 and $10 million a year. That gets distributed to the other universities. The socioeconomic dislocation in the community that is served, because the university is probably the number 1, 2, 3, 4, or 5 employer, is enormous and adds cost in terms of health and social services, right? So it's like a prison closure or a base closure. There is one added factor which is really important for us to understand together. Our rural communities in particular rely on these universities to produce the business and professional and healthcare leaders they need to sustain themselves. So they're not just experiencing the social disruption, the economic disruption, they're using these universities to build their leadership.
Let me interrupt you for a minute, if I may. I said early on that we didn't have a dog in the fight.
Yeah.
I'm asking you for an objective assessment of what you found in the report. You're going to, well, we want to close something, and you're playing this artificial game of chancellor for a day.
Yeah.
I think it's dangerous. I'm really looking for much more objective comments from you than that.
I appreciate that, but I'm just saying I take closure off the table because it's a bad policy decision in my view. It is very bad math.
And I appreciate that comment.
Right. So now move on to the other, which really got to consolidation. And so consolidation has two formats, right? There's the structural component, which is challenged by the political construction. But if you think about the sharing system, my opening statement, what we're able to do now, what we're trying to build, what we're seeking investment for, and it's not central, it does not come centrally. What we're seeking investment for is the opportunity to ensure that students at any one of our universities have access to the full breadth of programming across our system. Think about the opportunities that arrive from that. Now, is that consolidation? I'm not sure what Rand meant by consolidation. I think it meant banging organizations together.
Good.
What about thinking about student portability? What about thinking about how students can move so that a student in a rural university can have access to the full breadth of business or healthcare specialties that university may not be able to afford on its own because its enrollments are too small. That is the system that we're moving for. Think about a high expertise area like in data science or data mining, where the only way to really offer a program might be to aggregate expertise that exists at several campuses and create programs that are jointly offered. That's the world in which we're moving to. Imagine an opportunity to work as we're working at Shippensburg with Volvo, or to work through a variety of assemblies that we're hosting in various regions, working closely with manufacturers, working closely with information technology firms like Apple, like Unisys, like Unilever, in order to map out competencies.
We're way out of time here, Chancellor, but let me just say in closing, I appreciate all that you're saying. They're very positive things. I'm not taking exception to that. My question simply was, did you find value in the report? And I find you being defensive of the report, or against the comments in the report.
And I'm sorry to present that way. I found value in both reports. They were important in framing our work, framing our analytical work. We did the analytical work on closure. My advice to you is it's bad math, it's bad policy. I think there are really interesting opportunities in our universities working together, which is the strategy that we're building to, and that reflects many of the themes that came out both of NCHEMS and RAND.
All right.
Thank you.
Thank you, Senator Mann. Senator Swank, followed by Senator Scavella.
Thank you and good morning. And just to kind of set the stage for the comments and the question that I'll make, I am a member of the Board of Governors and I've served on it for a couple of years, and certainly since the Chancellor has come on board. And I take this role to heart. I take it very seriously. I have a institution in my district, Kutztown University, and I know the value of that institution. The comments that you just recently made, Chancellor, bear repeating about what system redesign really looks like. I also serve on that committee. More committees maybe than I can count, but we're serious about what we need to do to recreate a system that works for the Commonwealth now and in the future. And you know, we talked about enrollment. We're not making enough 18, 19, and 20-year-olds, and I don't know that we have the power to change that, but we do know that we have the opportunity to look at people mid-career Many of us know, and certainly have seen it with our own children, if not for ourselves, you have to continually educate yourself. Lifelong education is going to be a requirement in almost every field that we can possibly think of, any professional endeavor. That's an opportunity, that's a window for us within the system to really make a difference in the Commonwealth. So I want it to be understood that yes, we are working on trying to create, and we know we're running out of time. And I think that's where the message, again, to my colleagues, is that it's now or never. We really have to decide whether we want a system or whether we're just going to watch this erode away and see what it does in terms of, the consequences. And I don't think that's a future that we want. It's not the future that we owe to our constituents, and certainly to the young people in this Commonwealth, and anybody in whatever, part of their career that is looking for further education. So I wanted to put that out there, that process is in place, and that we have certainly talked extensively about, what we can do to keep the system intact but repurposed in a way that really meets our needs. Because walking away from a community isn't just devastating a Main Street, it's also making a huge difference in the regional economy around those individual institutions. You said that, Chancellor. But here's my question for you quickly. Last year, the Board of Governors voted not to increase tuition. And even before I ask this question, I have to say, a bit in response to Senator Dinniman's comments about the scholarship program, that wasn't something the board discussed. We didn't know about it. And we recently had a meeting. So unless there was some kind of an agreement that I didn't hear about, that wasn't on the table.
That's fair.
But you remember that we had a 0 increase in tuition last year. Chancellor, looking at this budget, and knowing the mood in the economy as well as in the legislature, do we have built within this budget, or even in the governor's proposal, which is less than what we had as a system had requested, are we going to be able to make that same commitment?
So thank you. So the budget that you currently have in front of you does not include about $7 million in anticipated salary and benefits cost, because it was done before the contracts were known. It just is. I think we knew AFSCME, so AFSCME's in there, and then the rest are not. So for the next year, that will make a difference. I believe in the budget, Senator. And as I said in my opening remarks, I believe we need it for different reasons. The 2%, the cost to carry, that will enable us to continue our commitment to student affordability. The $20 million, which is the one-time investment, will enable us to address the issues that Senator Langerholtz was raising. We were not built to share, and that's not a criticism. Systems weren't. Been around for 20 plus years, our universities, to enable us to take advantage of the opportunities to ensure that students in every region of the state have access to the full breadth of opportunity that a system can provide, is going to require us to reconfigure our infrastructure. That's what that $20 million goes towards. It is not a central expenditure. It is spent through a shared services organization, which is cooperatively managed by the universities. So which part of that, if we get the 2% and not the 20 million, we'll be able to continue our commitment to affordability, but we won't be able to build the sharing infrastructure, which is critical to the longevity of the system as a whole and to the workforce needs of the state. If we get the 17 million or the 20 million and not the 2%, my guess is, depending on how it was factored, most of that would have to go to universities because of student affordability comes first.
And student affordability has always been part of our commitment. And I think that's where the governor was coming from with the scholarship program. So I hear you say that what we'll be able to offer to students for the coming year will depend upon what this budget looks like when it's ultimately passed. Okay. And I'm hopeful that we can get to where we need to be. Again, I apologize for rambling, but I'm committed to this system. Thank you.
Thank you, Senator Swank. Just to follow up to that, if the budget in line with Senator Swank's question, if the budget is passed the way the governor had proposed it, not considering the scholarship program, which wasn't in your budget conversations, what are you forecasting in terms of tuition?
I'm forecasting a difficult conversation for the board in April. I think it would have to choose between student affordability and the sharing system, building out the infrastructure. My guess is that it would, my hope is it would put student first. The guidance that the board gave to the universities when they built their budgets was to expect no increase above the rate of inflation for the net cost of attendance. That would be tuition, room, and board.
All right, so the budget that was proposed had an assumption that you would at least increase the tuition by the cost of living.
I would be careful because we're looking now at net price, which includes tuition, fees, room, and board. So in the past, tuition was done in isolation, but remember, tuition is less than half the total cost the student pays. So we're now actually very sensitive to the total cost a student pays. So we will use tuition, or the recommendation from the Chancellor's office will be to use tuition to ensure that the student is paying no more than the prevailing rate of inflation. So that would also depend on the fees and room and board charges that are being used at the universities.
Thank you,
Make sense?
Yes, thank you, Chancellor.
Thank you.
We will move to Senator Scavello, followed by Senator Collette.
Good morning, Mr. Chancellor, and thank you very much for being here. I would appreciate if you could quicker answers, because I only have 5 minutes. Sorry. So I'm looking at some numbers, and I have to tell you, I'm really concerned. And I don't know if you feel that concern as well. I'm not going to mention the school, but I will tell you, you had a school out there that had 7,315 students, okay? University, 7,315 students. Today, that same university has 4,703. It's down 2,600. And over a 10-year period, it's a 55% cut over that 10-year period in students. Drop, 55%. That same school, however, is down 68 employees. And that's both sides. So, and I can go down this list and show you another 8 or 9 of them, sir. My concern is we're growing the cost, and then the governor's going to come out with a $204 million number to hand out to students so that they can drive down the cost for those students. But what really bothers me on top of it all, it's also available to out-of-state students. It's out, and you're saying that, that no one else, the governor was in Shippensburg, one of those, and I'm not going to mention that, the numbers there, but was there, no, excuse me, it wasn't Shippensburg, it was at Lock Haven. By the way, Lock Haven went from 54.51 to 31.62 in that period of time. It's 72% reduction. What are we doing wrong? If you go back 5 years ago, and I'm not going to, my buddy in the back is here from APSCUF, I use the supermarket analogy, I'm not going to use it. But I have to tell you, it's almost, when I look at this, I'm thinking the same way. I'm actually looking at the same thing. Because here's what's going to happen. We keep helping the schools that are really hurting, and it's going to come off the backs of the others. I think sustainably, what do you have, 4 or 5 universities right now that can sustain on their own? Am I correct? Or my numbers, of the universities that are right now, how many can sustain on their own without us having to give them any extra money?
Without any extra money?
Yeah, without, this year, next year, I'm sure that the other school districts got to be, has to have a dish out and help me to you, aren't they?
Hence the sustainability plan, which is a very rapid march to sustainability. I mean, you're absolutely right. These numbers are, and every university that receives a public dollar, in my view, whether it's a FIA or appropriation, should publish this level of data. This is accountability.
Yeah.
And I'm not ducking this. And this is what system redesign is all about. The central questions that you have asked, that the first gentleman asked, they are core.
We need to put kids back into the schools. And the only way you're going to do that is reducing costs.
Correct.
And you've got to look at your cost structures.
Correct.
And maybe within that university, you might want to dry dock a building and try to, those type of things rather than keep, what I'm saying? You might have to look at things like that.
Yeah.
I know they're hard to say, but sometimes to save a school, you might have to look at, I'm looking at this, and in the last 5 years, and I'm taking Westchester out because we should learn from that school. In the last 5 years, your enrollment from 2015 to 2019 went from 90,000 students to 78,000 students without the Shippensburg, without Westchester in those numbers.
Yeah.
That's significant.
Yeah.
You've got one school district that's lost 4,500 students, 44, 49. Yep, I'm just looking at this and I'm saying to myself, and I've heard it we were discussing earlier, what is SUNY doing that we're not doing? I'm just, because they're getting our students, there must be.
So
They got to be going somewhere.
So New York State is funded at a much higher level than Pennsylvania state system, so the affordability is considerably different. So it's
But what's their overall cost within those? That might very well be. But what's the overall cost within that university? Are we talking apples to apples? What's the payroll? What's the benefits? All that other stuff you have to look at. Don't just tell me what the state gives them.
Yeah.
Tell me what's paid out in each one of those universities.
I can get back to you with those numbers, sir. Can I just say that in this budget, in this request, in this narrative, you'll see that a commitment to saving between $80 and $120 million. Can I break that down for you? And I want
80. I'm going to write that down. How much?
And between $80 and $120 million. Can I break that down for you?
Yeah, go right ahead.
$52 to $80 million over the next 5 years in cumulative savings on shared services, $40 million in personnel reduction costs, and $6 to $8 million annual and avoided costs by demolishing underutilized buildings.
The 40 million, when you're in the savings.
40 million, and it's a current estimate based on the sustainability plans.
Do you have a numbers, and how does that break down? Do you have it? You just come up with a number. What did you break it down with? Professors, you have it. How did you break it down?
It's 580. It's 580 employees overall at 9 universities that are experiencing the greatest financial stress. We expect to see those numbers.
580. And what's the breakdown between service and?
I don't have that in services.
Yeah, well, between professors, service,
I don't have that in my head. I can get back to you.
Yeah, because if you come up with a number, you had to use.
And we did. No,
you had to have,
And to be clear, and I don't want to, we are taking this very seriously. The sustainability plan, which I mentioned, requires our universities to balance their budgets. 9 universities experiencing the greatest financial stress have created 5-year plans which demonstrate how they will balance their budgets, from which these numbers are derived. And they will be held accountable for balancing those budgets in the way that you, I hope, will hold me and the board accountable for taking these actions, because you're absolutely right, now is the time.
I feel like Rome is burning and Nero's fiddling. I'm seeing these numbers, and I mentioned it 5 years ago, and I hope I was wrong, but I saw which way we were going, and here we are today, and it's worse than what I thought it was going to be.
In these halls, in your offices, I have said very openly, this can has been kicked, and in my public remarks at my State of the System address, this can has been kicked down the road, and this road has ended. And the reason for publishing these data is that so we all understand that, and we all understand that public higher education is a partnership and it's a choice.
Thank you.
We'll make that choice.
Thank you, Sir Escabella. This is a very important exchange, and one of the things that I think is important in regards to these comparisons, and that's going to happen, and it happens all the time, that if we're given the gravity of the choices we have to make, and in line with your interest in transparency and full information, if we're going to do benchmarking, it's got to be a balanced equation. We have to benchmark on revenue and expense, because that's what I'm hearing right now, and maybe it leads to the same conclusion, right? But what I'm hearing in benchmarking is always a revenue conversation. It's never an expense conversation in terms of that benchmarking exercise, and that is not a full picture. So the response I tend to get is, we'll get back to you on that piece. But what I do know is that the revenue isn't where it should be. So
there is some benchmarking in this book. So
on an expense side.
On the expense side, correct, and on the salary side, when we.
All right. So give us the benchmarking for New York right now. Then
I don't have that. I do it. We do our benchmarking against our national peer group, which
Okay.
is beyond New York. So if you look at the, we do it in terms of expenditure per student FTE, we're about average. We do it at student-faculty ratio, we're about average. We do it at our salary levels for our faculty, we're a little bit above average, but about average. We do it for our executive leadership, we're about average.
We need to go deeper than that.
We can do that.
We need to, because there are certain states that we need to benchmark against.
Yeah.
You know, and that's, you know, obviously the ones that are right around us are the most logical. So thank you for that. Senator Phillips Hill, followed by Senator Senacero.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Chancellor Greenstein, it's good to see you. I'd like to focus on an article that came out last September in the Philadelphia Inquirer that was very concerning. And I'll read the first paragraph from Susan Snyder's article. It said, still under scrutiny by the Federal Education Department for mismanagement of millions in financial aid, Cheney University is facing fresher allegations of misspending, this time lodged by the former leaders of its vaunted Honors Academy. Governor is pledging to repay Cheney's debt obligations through capital funding. However, a 2016 audit found that Cheney plugged a budget hole with $3 million that was originally intended for scholarship funding and research funding. I think Ms. Snyder's article said that these funds were, and I quote, raided. So in this budget, you're requesting another $5 million for Cheney's Keystone Academy, the very fund that was misappropriated. As a member of FIA's board of directors, alongside with senators who are sitting here in this Appropriations Committee, Senators Blake, Haywood, Hughes, and Scavello, who are all committed to how we best address the student loan crisis, what can you say that will convince us that this is a wise investment, knowing that there was past abuse of these funds? How can we assure that students are getting that money?
Yeah. So a couple things, and it's detail, but I think it's an important one, is that the request for additional Keystone dollars did not come from the state system. It's like the Pennsylvania, like the...
And I understand that, but it was the state system that misappropriated those funds.
No, I understand that, but I just wanted to be clear on that point. But more importantly, to your point, I have no evidence that there is any wrongdoing under the current administration. That case is still obviously pending.
And I understand that. But what I want to make sure is that when dollars are sent to students, that those students get the benefit of those dollars, that they aren't used by the university for something other than they were originally intended.
I think I certainly am assured that that is the case. And just in terms of impact of those dollars, this year, for the first time, we've seen Cheney's first to second term retention. This is a jump. Students who come back for the second term after the first term jump from 36% to 70%. That's unheard of.
And that's very good. And certainly I would like to see going forward that no student scholarship monies go for anything other than student scholarships. Now, if I can follow up on Senator Mensch's conversation with you with regard to the Rand Commission report. As I recall, of those 5 possible options that were put forward by the Rand report, not a single one referenced a university closure. So I think we have to set that straight. But what I do recall is that there's an ongoing theme of red tape that the system and you, as chancellor, are bound by, from which you need to be freed. So all 5 of those options said that there were bureaucratic red tape challenges. And if I look at exactly what it said, it talked about internal factors, governance that's reportedly bureaucratic and placed politics above system needs, inflexible labor relations, state regulations that slow down procurement and construction, purchasing of services, improvement of facilities. Have you looked at that component of the Rand report? What is it that you've identified that you need, and how can the General Assembly assist you in reducing that regulatory red tape? We are in the process of looking at passing a number of regulatory reforms.
Yeah. So thank you for that question. We spent most of our time on those recommendations. Critical amongst them were resetting our relationships, frankly, with our faculty union. It's a work in progress, but I'm very proud of the progress that we've made. They show up in any number of ways. I think that's been critical. We've reset our relationships with our councils of trustees by engaging them more effectively in the work of the universities in the system. I'm very proud of that work as well. We have, in the House Bill 2171, 2, and 3, we have sought regulatory relief, which will eliminate that red tape, giving the board the authority it needs to move quicker in response to really challenging financial circumstances that you've already identified, but also to allow us to use non-public money in a way which is not regulated as in the same way that public funds are. That slow things down and frankly cost us money. 75% of our dollars don't come from the state, and we use them as if they do. And we reckon it probably costs us 25 to 30% more on any contract rewrite, a cost that ultimately redound to the students. So those bills contain our ask in that department.
Very good. Thank you, Mr. Chancellor. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Senator Phillips Hill. Senator Senacero, followed by Senator Stefano.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Chancellor, good morning.
Good morning.
When I first got to college, I was interested in becoming a Foreign Service officer. I have to tell you, you are a far better diplomat than I ever would have been. Certainly, much of the discussion so far this morning has been on the cost side of the equation, and that's without question an important piece of this. I agree with Chairman Brown in that respect. But we've had very little discussion about the revenue side. And, you know, it's not for a lack of trying on the governor's part, because he has, and in fact, we've made great strides, I think, over the 5 years that he's been in office. But where do we stand today as a state system of schools in terms of the level of state funding that our system gets in comparison to other states in the union?
We're 47th nationally.
We're 47th. 47th. Think about that just for a moment. I say you're a diplomat because you and everyone who works in the state system, and frankly all the students who study in the state system, have the absolute right to be enraged, outraged, livid by the lack of leadership by this General Assembly. The fact that we are not investing to the extent that we should be investing. The fact that we are not giving you the resources you need. We're right now, under the governor's proposal, I think we would be at about the 2007-2008 fiscal year level. Where would we be had we kept pace with where we were at that point in increases over the years? Where would we be in terms of tuitions? Could you tell us?
The figure in my head is that if we were funded at the average rate for all states, we could reduce tuition by 22%, which would be $1,400 off of $7,500, so $6,000.
Okay. And as you said earlier, I mean, we are number 2 in the country in terms of debt, student debt, or have we gotten to number 1? We're at number 2. And that rate of tuition has a big part of that. I completely agree with the comments that Senator Schwenk made earlier about the reasons why we should not be closing any of the institutions. Among other things, we need a robust workforce development infrastructure moving further into the 21st century. I think it's going to become more and more of an issue. We talked a little bit about that last year in the appropriations hearings. But the cost that our students are asked to bear, as you just said, has a direct relationship with the amount of funding that the state gives to our system. And that's something that each and every one of us in the state Senate and in the state House on the other side of the building needs to start getting serious about. It's just it's inexcusable that Pennsylvania ranks number 47 in the country. I want to ask you about, I have limited time, but I want to ask you about one related issue we haven't discussed this morning. And it's something that, frankly, has become more and more of an issue nationwide, and that is food insecurity for our students. Have we experienced that at the state system? What, if anything, are we doing about to address that issue, and how is it impacting?
I'm sorry, the issue again was?
Food insecurity.
Food insecurity.
Yeah.
The numbers I have seen nationally are that as many as 30% of students self-reported have experienced some form of food insecurity. I think all of our universities have food pantries and the usual sort of, and take the usual sort of steps. I think critical is identifying students who are in need and encouraging them to come forward.
So I take it by your answer, though, that we don't have any real data on the numbers that we're dealing with in the state system.
Data are hard to collect because they're self-reported. They're
Right.
not hard.
Okay.
Yeah.
And there's a stigma, I assume,
Yeah.
too, which makes it difficult.
Yeah.
Is our system taking any affirmative steps to address the issue and in a way that perhaps get us past the stigma and making sure these kids are getting what they need?
Yes. Through our system redesign, our universities are working together on a whole package of things that will improve financial aid and affordability. It includes addressing food and housing insecurity, use of emergency aid dollars. Most students who drop out for financial reasons do so for less than $1,000. Various retention efforts, forgiving students debt, letting them register into the next term if they owe a few $100s, that sort of thing. There are best practices that exist nationally. We're integrating them, evaluating them, and integrating them into our work. That's part of the investment that we're looking for from the state for system redesign.
Great. Thank you very much, Chancellor.
This is so we're all in terms, again, full information when making tough decisions. Does the 47th include all state revenues via as well?
Yes, it does, yeah.
Okay. It's important that we have just a full picture. And on the amount per student, your information shows an inflationary adjusted amount, which all of us know, given where we were last decade and where we are now, adjusted for inflation, is a number going down. Can we present that same analysis on a per student basis?
Yes, expenditure per student is shown on page 56 in the book. That's total expenditure per student.
Revenue per student. You're doing it on an inflationary basis?
Yes, we can do revenue per student.
Okay,
yes,
because we're talking about adjusting our expenditures to reflect less students. It's also important to look at where our revenue is on a student
And
basis, because
that's
students have gone down.
And that is also available to you in the book on page 25.
That's a tuition number.
Funding per FTE, both tuition and state dollars. So the state dollars are shown in blue, 45.52 per student. Tuition dollars 12, tuition room fees board 12 plus per student.
Okay. Very good. Thank you. Thank you, Senator Santicero. Next, Senator Orgel, followed by Senator Pittman.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Chancellor, there's been a lot of talk about the RAND study. Senator Phillips Hill, Senator Mensch mentioned it, of course. I introduced that resolution that then Senator Mensch's committee was kind enough to fund. And so when people came to me and asked for that study, there were people who believed deeply in your mission. They want to see the Kutztowns and the Bloomsburgs and the East Stroudsburgs succeed, and that's why they brought it to us to ask for an independent study. I was curious in looking at why we needed that study. Basically, and it's been mentioned here several times, we don't have as many college-age students here in Pennsylvania as we used to, and it's not going to get any better anytime soon. It's going to get worse. So it's a serious demographic challenge, not just for you, but for many of your associates across the northeastern part of the country. And it's a very, very serious issue, and I'm glad to see that you're taking it seriously. I'm curious, though, in looking at the RAND recommendations, it seems that you've adopted the one that RAND said may not address long-term challenges. And I can understand why you don't want to consolidate and close, but you did not mention the other options that essentially would have said become more like Penn State or Pitt, or actually merge with Penn State or Pitt on a either short-term or permanent basis. I think the finding on the last one there said may be difficult to implement, but more likely to strengthen the university's financial situation. Why didn't you come to us and ask us to help you move in that direction rather than the position that you
So
prefer.
Can I use a word that's not consolidation, because that word has really difficult ramifications? I want to talk about affiliation and the development of programs and the utilization of staff and faculty resources in an affiliated way. That's where we're moving. It is a drift in the direction, it is a move in the direction of that particular recommendation without recognizing the challenges around the fundamental structural issues that are represented by consolidation, because it requires legislative action. Thing one. Thing two, it's really important to remember that the communities that our university serves are very different. They have very different needs. So affiliation is a means of expanding the opportunities that are available to their students and making them available at lower cost, right? So it does pursue the objectives that that Rand laid out. In terms of affiliation with Penn State and Pitt, I know the leadership there, obviously. I also know the literature on mergers and acquisitions in higher education, and one of the things you realize is that merging out of sector is really hard. Bringing a private together with a public is really hard. In this state, bringing a state related together with a public owned or state.
Although I'm told Georgia did just that.
No, they did that within system.
Okay.
Georgia did that within system, so it was basically merging like with like.
Okay.
And Georgia, just to be clear, had the authority, the board has the authority that we're asking for in 2171. So they could do that without coming to the state for legislative action.
Okay, but so the path that you've chosen, according to the RAND study, may not address long-term challenges.
I disagree. The path that we've identified is one where you build out a common infrastructure that enables us to utilize our resources as a system, to leverage our scale, which is still pretty big, to ensure that, I mean, what's happening now in the each tub on its own bottom approach is documented in the RAND study. So we're shifting that approach. We're breaking that approach. We're basically saying working together, utilizing our resources as a collective, enabling us to deliver instruction across universities, to develop programs across universities, will provide the long-term solution.
I certainly hope you're right, because we want to see these schools succeed. I'll make a statement that gets me in trouble with some of my fellow very, very part-time professors, but the world only needs so many political science graduates. And I tell my students that one night a week. What are you doing to become more like the Thaddeus Stevenses and the Penn College of Technologies and those schools that seem, we keep hearing that, their graduates are picked up right away and they're growing, not shrinking, given the demands of the workforce?
So two things really quickly. One of them is we're exercising existing authority and developing programs thoughtfully across the system. We're not going to approve the next nursing program if it cannibalizes existing. So we're building a system-wide academic program plan that will begin to see us develop niche activities that, in a complementary way, provide the needs of the state. That's really important. And then with respect specifically to workforce development, we've convened 5 assemblies in opportunity zones, working very closely with employers to identify the credentialing path, the credentials, the kind of workers they need. The areas that we're working are in manufacture, information technology, extraction, logistics and supply chain, construction, and I know I've missed one, but the idea is to work with employers to say, what do you need? More than just, I need people who can show up and pass a drug test, so that we can build an educational program around those needs. So that process has started. It's super exciting. It involves the chambers, the community colleges, the employers, as well as our universities. That process has kicked off, I guess, several months ago now.
As I keep hearing again and again from my employers back in the district that's where we really need your help and Penn State's help and Pitt's help at the jobs of the future. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you.
Thank you, Senator Argo. Senator Pittman, followed by Senator Martin.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Chancellor, thank you. I thought you laid out quite well how impractical it is to close an entire campus, and when you add in the political dynamics, I think that is highly unlikely. But I'd like to talk a little more about the physical plant of the campus. And you mentioned a little bit about demolition of buildings and spending money to demolish buildings. You know, representing IUP, growing up in the 80s and 90s, as the campus was expanding and properties were being consumed by the university, if you will, and taken off the tax rolls, there was a lot of angst within the community about how it was enveloping the entire town. Now we're sitting in a situation where there has to be excess capacity, not only in classroom space, but also living space, particularly whenever you factor in the online element of education. What is your vision of trying to reduce the physical plants of the university, to right-size them? And then have we looked at opportunities to return properties back to the tax rolls and put into other productive uses?
Yeah, we're looking at every option, in particular demolition of buildings that we own. I think we have a whole bunch slated. I said $9 to $18 million in savings, and we have the DGS capital we need to do that demolition, so that will move forward. The bigger challenge is the buildings that we have debt on. Those tend to be residence halls, not exclusively, but largely. We are looking at some private-public options where we partner with other organizations who will use those buildings, you know, for educational purposes that would be beneficial to us.
What about selling of excess land, excess parcels?
So we have been looking actually at a number of our universities, including Cheney, at different use of land and facilities, both in public-private partnership and and for sale. It's complicated because the land is owned by the state. But we have a better grasp over what is, talk about regulatory constraint, but we do have some land which is valuable. It's a difficult lift because it's owned by the state, it's not ours to sell.
Okay, but what barriers to making that lift are there? I get to the issue of, you're asking us for $100 million to save money.
Yeah.
And I get that sometimes you have to spend money to make money, sometimes you have to spend money to save money, but I have a hard time wrapping my head around, if you have opportunities to save, why do you necessarily need $100 million to do it? There's got to be ways, and there has to be barriers that we allow you to reduce these physical plants, find savings, and perhaps turn some of it into revenue-bearing opportunities.
Yeah. And just on that front, we're turning over every rock. I want to be clear that system redesign has two purposes. One is short-term, it's financial stabilization. There is a playbook, and we're following it. It's all about aligning costs with revenues. It's about building back office function, sharing services. It's about demolishing underutilized buildings and finding partnerships that generate different revenues. So we're down that path. The bigger challenge, and the more interesting one, frankly, is building the university that meets the needs of Pennsylvania in the future. You're right. The undergraduate high school leaving population is about to fall over a cliff starting in 2025, down 9% in 10 years. There is a growing unmet need of adults who need to reskill and upskill in order to maintain viability in the marketplace. By building the system that is outlined in this document, we are positioning ourselves to serve that market, not just for the system and its students, but for the state. That 47 to 60% gap in adults, educated adults, is a serious problem. And we are dead set on solving it, helping us to solve it.
The final point, this hearing, obviously, we've been focusing on the state system, but I do think we have to recognize our overall higher education footprint, our demographic realities, and the fact that I think we have oversupplied the Commonwealth with educational campuses and facilities that really aren't sustainable given the demographic realities that we're coming to. So are you communicating with the state-relateds in terms of how they're experiencing declines in enrollment or what they're trying to do to right-size their givings?
Yeah, we are in touch.
You getting anything out of it? Or?
We're all experiencing the same issues. We're experiencing them in different places. The direction that people are moving in is to shift the academic programs to the sectors of the market that are growing. They tend to be adult, they tend to be workforce related. In our case, it requires an infrastructure shift, and it requires financial stabilization, right sizing. In their cases, it looks very different. I think the other thing which is important to remember is that Pitt and Penn State, Temple, they're research universities. We have one, Indiana University, right? So we're different animals in a way. So we experience these changes in slightly different ways.
And we're going to keep that research university that way, right?
That is a question for you gentlemen, ladies.
Thank you, Chancellor. I wish you wouldn't have brought that up.
Thank you, Senator Pittman. Senator Martin, followed by Senator Yaw.
Thank you. Good morning, Chancellor. It's good to see you again. Sitting here, I go through a wide range of different conflicting viewpoints because I wear so many hats from a standpoint of not only sitting here on a probes, but sitting on the Board of Governors, and of course, having Millersville University in my district, which also happens to be my proud alum of. And I give great kudos to you for your vision and wanting to look at how to do things differently, to be marketable, and most importantly, to meet the mission of the system. Quality education that's affordable. And there's a lot of market forces at play right now in terms of, and some of it we're involved in terms of growing those jobs. I mean, you want to find the best way to keep Pennsylvania students in Pennsylvania? Let's have the jobs here for them to go to. You want to attract out-of-state students and you want them to stay into Pennsylvania? Guess what? You're going to have jobs in order for them to do that. But other states and other systems have targeted Pennsylvania mainly because of that affordability issue and because of where a lot of jobs are. So I give you great kudos for looking at that and the relationships you're building to do that. But I have some questions. First question is, you have a package of bills in the House right now that's looking to grant new authorities to the board that haven't been seen before. And so I think my general fundamental question is, why would we grant the board this kind of power over these individual institutions, given the precedence of past boards not being able to control labor costs, not being able to control or see where the marketplace was going to make changes? What kind of faith would we have in putting that kind of power into the Board of Governors?
So I guess there's a couple of things. So one of them is, I think we're demonstrating a very aggressive approach, and we've made progress. We have more to do, obviously, but have a very aggressive approach to aligning our costs with our revenues. The board has taken very difficult decisions and will continue to. The sustainability policy in particular. It creates real consequence, real accountability for universities that are unable to balance their budgets in a sustaining way. First thing. Second thing, I mentioned the work we've done with our collective bargaining units collaboratively, really achieving, frankly, contracts that are fair, fiscally responsible, and give us breathing room, a few years to really nail this problem. I think that's been critically important. I think there's another issue though, and that is, I'm not a student of Act 188, but if I look at it carefully, it's a magnificent piece of public policy in the 1980s. It's a compromise document that allows the system to take itself out, the universities to take itself out from under the Department of Education. But it also distributes decision-making authority very widely. And as a consequence, nobody is accountable for anything, which, in my humble opinion, is why we are where we are. It is a thrust of the RAND report. It is a thrust of the NCHEMS report. So the ask in 2171 is, the board is demonstrating, the chancellor's office is demonstrating, the universities are demonstrating through courageous leadership of their presidents, our collaboration with our bargaining units. We are demonstrating our ability, our willingness to take this on with seriousness of purpose. Absent a single source of accountability, what's the likelihood of our ability to get it done?
Appreciate that. You'd mentioned earlier, and there's been references to basically the financial studies done with each of the presidents of the individual institutions. And I've had a couple of my colleagues ask, I think it's something we'd be interested in seeing as a group, if that's possible, to be able to see what we're actually investing in, I think one. But also want to remember, and Senator Brown put it out there, because listen, we can have a discussion about where we are in terms of the amount of money we put in collectively. I think someone said we're 47th in the country. Let's have a discussion about that, what we put in. But the one thing we can never forget, and I know you've heard me say this at Board of Governors meetings, there's two sides of that ledger. the people paying for it, meaning the taxpayers and the students who are sometimes issuing debt, and on the other side is what it costs. And I think a lot of us want to get to the bottom as to what's driving that cost to put us as one of the top states in terms of affordability in the entire country in terms of what it costs to go to college. And of course, we're one of the highest with student debt as well, and that correlation. We have to get to the bottom of that. And for me personally, even with a lot of the things that are being offered with the retirement program, the most important component, which is the number one cost driver of any organization, public or private, is personnel costs. What would it take to get back to the staff-student ratios that we had about a decade ago when we were at a peak of enrollment? What kind of cost savings would that deliver to the system in order to accomplish a lot of this restructuring and whatever else that we need to do?
North of 60 and south of $70 million.
So about $70 million. I think it's imperative. We're all faced with making those tough decisions. The numbers do not look as good in terms of to the future that, well, we're just going to hold on to this same infrastructure from a decade ago and hoping that it's going to be backfilled. The final thing is, and you used this quote early on, partners in the General Assembly. There's a lot of things that have occurred, even though we're a system that have been dealing with individual institutions that have been outside the purview of the General Assembly, and quite frankly, outside the purview of the Board of Governors as well. As someone with an institution in its district, just give you one example, the fact that we're one of the top science graduating universities in the state system in Millersville University, and students that are graduating from there, and yet they're facing big structural things that they'd want to do in order to accommodate more as they keep getting applicants, but we can't with the funding that's coming down. To continue to see cases where loans are made, then they're forgiven, and then they're repaid back in capital funds, which are going to 3 institutions, even though the money came from the entire system allocation, to me is not fair to the institutions that are doing their best in order to hold their heads above the water. I think if anyone that's sitting on this board would look at how we dole out the money and the funding formula to the money that the state system is given, it's real easy to say. Your top performing institutions are getting the least amount of state support. The Westchesters, the Millersvilles, and at the top of it, in terms of the amount of dollars that go to state system per student, are some of the worst performing. That's why I think it's critical we're having the conversations with the Higher Education Funding Commission and how we do things. It's backwards in how we're doing it, and my big worry, from many different perspectives, is the fact that we are missing out on opportunities with the institutions that are growing, that are trying their best to keep their head above water, that they cannot do the things because they're not getting the resources. The resources are being funneled through back channels to create opportunities that every single child in the Commonwealth isn't being given in terms of scholarships, and that's just fundamentally not fair. So, thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Senator Martin. Senator Yuan, followed by Senator Street.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I look at the numbers that you gave us in the handout, and of the 14 universities, there were only 2 that had a positive enrollment increase last year. That means there are 12 of them that had a negative increase, and or negative enrollment. Bloomsburg had a 14% minus. California is 28% down. Cheney's 49% down. Clarion 33% down. East Stroudsburg 15% down. Edinburgh 44% down. Indiana 30% down. Kutztown 20% down. Lock Haven 41%. Mansfield 49%. Millersville 10%. Shippensburg 26%. Slippery Rock was up 1, and Westchester was up 17. I don't see how you can look at any solution to this problem without addressing the physical facilities. And this may have been the state system may have been a great model 50 years ago. It is not today. And I think that it comes down, you've heard it, I know we've heard about the number of secondary students that are out there. There's a smaller pool to choose from. I think it comes down to supply and demand is one of the, and the problem is The supply that's being provided by the state system is not where the demand is anymore. And one of your comments was that we need to keep these smaller institutions, or the ones that are having all the negative enrollment numbers, open, because that's where the rural leaders go. I don't think the numbers support your theory, because the rural institutions are the ones that have had the greatest reduction in numbers. Look, I get it. I know how important Mansfield University is to the town of Mansfield. I know how important Clarion is to Clarion. But somewhere along the line, we really have to take a look at, and I understand it costs money to close institutions, but would we be better off to close them, take that money that's there, fold it into the institution, as Senator Martin said, that really are thriving, and help them, put the faculty there, and I can't understand why. I live in Williamsport. Within 50 miles of Williamsport are 3 state system schools. That may have been great 50 years ago or 75 years ago. Today, it's less than an hour's drive. It makes no sense to me. And here's part of the other problem that I don't think that the state system is recognizing. The demographics in Pennsylvania are this: 73% of the population in Pennsylvania lives in 19 counties. 73%. That means 27% lives in 48 counties. And even when you talk about, well, we have a workforce coming on that needs to be retrained, where's this workforce going to come from? It's going to come from the populated areas. It's not going to come in rural Pennsylvania. Yes, there's part of rural Pennsylvania needs to be retrained, there's no question. But if you're talking about where is the student population going to come from for these institutions, it is not going to come from rural Pennsylvania. And believe me, I live in rural Pennsylvania. I know the ramifications. But I also look at it as like, where are we spending our money? What's happening to it? Where do we, if we're investing money in a quality education system, how can we get the most out of it? And I'm not sure that we're doing that the way that we're doing it, by just saying we're going to spread money all over everything, and then we're going to preserve the system as it is. We're not going to correct the system. And, does it cost money to correct the system? It might. But in the long run, that may be the best thing to do, and it may be the best thing for education in Pennsylvania.
So I appreciate the comment, sir. Look, public policy is a choice. Higher education is a partnership between the General Assembly and the institutions. It requires investment on the part of the General Assembly and real action on the part of the institutions, and that's what we're talking about here. The path that we're on is one of aggressive cost realignment. Senator Martin, the points you raised are exactly correct. That aggressive salary path is the one that we're on. That's why we put a sustainability policy in place, and we're going to execute against it. The work that we're doing on buildings is entirely, driving another, another arrow in the quiver. The work on shared services and the funding, the potential savings from them is yet another arrow in the quiver. Financial stabilization is really important. I don't want to lose sight of the other aspect of this, which gets back to affiliation. Our ability to work together to provide a different quality and breadth of service to not just the high school leaving population, but to the adults who need us wherever they live, right? In rural Pennsylvania or in urban Pennsylvania.
I'm open to any suggestion that's different. And, one of the things that I disagree with is the comments about that Pennsylvania funds higher education so low. One of the things I found out in many of the organizations I've been involved in, Pennsylvania is such a diverse state. That's why we have, whatever it is, 2,500 municipalities, and we've got another 2,500 authorities, and we have 500 school districts. It's very difficult to say what Pennsylvania really spends on anything because it's so diverse. I tried to look up some numbers about the number of higher education or post-secondary educational institutions in Pennsylvania. The one number I came up with is we have almost 160 higher education institutions in Pennsylvania. So what do we how much money do we put in them? We are so diverse. I mean, I guess that's a good thing. We're not like some states where everything can maybe run at the county level or whatever at certain levels. We really are a diverse population, and I know that some of the people that I deal with in the Chesapeake Bay Commission, their comment was, we don't see how Pennsylvania gets anything done. You're so diverse in your population.
I feel that pain. Can I just say just a couple things? Look, I don't envy you the challenges that you face. The policy choices that you face are real, and they will have long and lasting implications, and I'm glad it's you and not me. I can say that on the institution side, we're facing the same kind of choices. We're doing it aggressively, we're doing it deliberately, we're doing it with purpose, and we're demonstrating results as we go, and we intend to be fully accountable for our successes and our failures going forward. One other comment. I still wear a kind of a national hat sometimes. I still be able to ring people up from my old life on a national stage, and they remember who I am. Pennsylvania, what we're trying in the Pennsylvania state system is perceived nationally as being as radical a transformation as public higher education has tried. As radical as public higher education has tried. That doesn't mean we're going to succeed, but in terms of what we're seeking to accomplish, not just in terms of the financial stabilization, super important. We cannot get anywhere unless we stabilize ourselves, but in terms of the investment in the future.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Senator Young. Senator Street, followed by Senator Laughlin.
Good morning. Good morning. One, thank you for your service and your hard work. A couple of things. One, I do want to applaud the work that you've done with respect to helping move Cheney along. It is appreciated by some of us. Secondly, want to point out, you've asked for a measure of authority with respect to doing, I think, what you called a radical redesign. And I found my discussions with you about that encouraging. I do believe, I think as most members of the General Assembly do, on both sides of the aisle, that a redesign is needed. However, asking us to relinquish permanently our ability to oversee structural changes to the system is something that I think is a difficult request. Is it possible that we could grant you for a period of time so the limited authority that you need that then would sunset, so we would then be able to retain our authority, so we're not giving every chancellor forever the power to make those decisions without our further review?
Yes, of course.
You know, I would be interested in seeing a more narrowly refined request with respect to the authority. Like, how much authority do you need to do the radical redesign, and for what period of time? And would be inclined to support a more limited in scope request. And so to the extent that you could put that together and get it to the chairs for our distribution, I think members would be interested in that. The second thing, a number of members of this body on both sides of the aisle we have recognized and done tours, have done around the state about the fact that institutions that are working with labor and industry and business and our business community to talk about what those skill sets that industry needs are succeeding, and they're growing. It is something that I hear from members of the business community, and it is certainly something that we hear from our students who are more interested in getting an education that allows them to make a decent living than they are experiencing John Locke's theory of enlightenment. That being said, have you contemplated in your radical redesign how the state system could participate, play a role in that? And I'm specifically looking at things like we have an expanding hydroponics industry in agriculture that's important. You're talking about micro welding and skill sets that are needed in cell phone construction, the fastest growing product on planet Earth, and things of that nature that are real skills, that are real industries that are growing. And to the extent that this design allows that to succeed, I think it could be helpful to a number of our institutions. And finally, I will say, while population is growing in the Southeast, to the extent that we design a system that makes some sense, there are students that will be interested in traveling around the Commonwealth to go to school if those schools and institutions were meeting the needs educationally of the job market. So if you can react to some of that, I'd appreciate it.
Yeah, on the workforce side, we're working at two levels. So one at the university level where there's some fantastic work going on. Just a couple of examples. Shippensburg is working directly with Volvo, creating pipelines for its students into Volvo, but also retraining opportunities for Volvo workers. Millersville is working with Lancaster General Health to provide bespoke training to that organization. They're working with Rock Lidditz to do a pipeline into that industry, so that's all good. And we have many other examples of that. At the system level, we're working on the statewide, in a statewide arena in the assemblies that I just mentioned. There are several of them, but we're working directly with large corporations. So for example, in manufacture with Lockheed Martin, Merck, P&G, Procter & Gamble, Volvo, in construction with Flagler Force, in extraction with Shell, with Chesapeake Energy, with Keen Frac, in information technology with Apple, Unisys, Amazon, Unilever, Giant Foods, and supply chain with UPS and Walmart. The idea is basically borrowed from Virginia. We bring the employers together in the room, typically their HR folks. We hammer out what skills they're looking for, whether retraining existing workers or for new workers. And then we build credentialing programs, educational programs around those skill sets. So that's just moving forward. It was launched a few months ago. It's a very exciting opportunity, and it's an opportunity for us, again, through this sharing way to develop these understandings with industry and then to begin to meet directly the needs that they identify.
And I applaud that work. It's impressive, and some of those things were things I knew and some I didn't. The other thing, to my colleagues' comments about the fact that 73% of the population is in, he said 19 counties. It's, I would suggest that partnerships with some of those school districts Absolutely. To introduce folks to the state system of higher education could be really helpful in terms of getting students there. And while there are 500 school districts, some of them are pretty small and some of them are pretty large. And you could probably structure partnerships with, if you started with a few of the strategically large school districts, you could probably get a significant number of students interested in looking at the system. I mean, there are over 215,000 children in the Philadelphia school district alone. And the 5 collar counties outside of Philadelphia now have a population that exceeds Philadelphia. The 5-county area of Philadelphia, and those 5 counties have 3.4 million people, roughly a third of the state's population.
No, it's great. And I want to acknowledge my faculty colleagues and academic leadership on the campus for basically working closely together to figure out how to do dual enrollment programs for high school students, which I'm hoping will unlock this gate. We had some of our own internal regulatory constraints. We've removed those, I hope. So I'm looking forward to making progress there as well. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Senator Street, Senator Laughlin, followed by Senator Haywood.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Most of my financial questions have been answered already. That's kind of the downside of going nearly last. But anyway, thanks for being here. And I have some questions about Edinboro University and more specifically the Perico campus, Chancellor. It's interesting to me that we're talking about declining enrollment, the costs are going up. It sounds like the state system wants to transition at least and dabble in the community college area with workforce development. And if I'm stating that incorrectly, you can correct me. But that's what I heard today, to kind of fill the adult learner needs. And I'm sure you're probably aware that in March, the Board of Education is coming to Erie to vote on our community college application because the County of Erie wants to start a brand new community college as well, even in these declining enrollment times. Edinboro, or Perico campus, I think if I'm stating it correctly, was known as the Communities College, and it filled kind of a need for low-cost degrees. And yet it's being closed due to lack of enrollment, if I understand that correctly. So given everything that I just said, I'd like to hear your thoughts on a few of those things.
So a couple of them. Can I start with workforce? Workforce has always been everybody's. Our schools were largely formed as education, normal schools. Last time I checked, teachers were part of the workforce. University of Pennsylvania has a fine medical school. It's workforce-oriented, right? We have shifted over time to become more STEM, business, health, because that's what the workforce needs have been. You know, I urged the members of the Higher Education Funding Commission last week to stop thinking, and I know it's hard, in terms of sectors. This is mine, this is mine, this is mine, and think in terms of students who have to constantly retraining to remain viable in the workforce, which requires segments instead of husband. Second thing, with Perico, I believe you are correct that that there is an opportunity to think differently about the use of the Perico campus to meet the community's needs. I urged the Higher Education Funding Commission last week to think differently about the use of public dollars, particularly with regard to facilities, right? I mean, again, breaking down some of these old paradigms, if there is space, is supported with public dollars, it is underutilized space. How could it be better utilized, independently of what particular sector it was allocated to originally? You know, think about, somebody asked about vocational tech training. We have underutilized space in areas where there's high need for vocational tech training. Why wouldn't we partner with, and we've spoken to Thaddeus Stevens and others, why wouldn't we partner with a VOTEC school? We have underutilized space, they have expertise. I mean, the difficulty is the equipment investment, right? But this requires a different kind of thinking about the utilization of public assets, which include buildings, which include facility, right? And so I think there's an opportunity to maybe lead that way around Edinburgh and Perico.
Well, we can certainly have a more in-depth conversation at a follow-up meeting to this. I just felt the need to kind of air that out a little bit. I think, you know, we obviously have some needs in Erie County that are not quite being met in the workforce development area. And, you know, when you look at all the moving parts up there, it's like one side's not talking to the other right now. And that's not good for any of us, either financially or for the students. I have a follow-up question as well. And this is a little off topic. It's not in your booklet that you provided. Pennsylvania is dabbling with the thought of legalizing recreational marijuana. There's other states that have already done it. Have you looked at any impact that has had on the student body at all, like with graduation rates or any of that?
So I'm always very super attuned to the student success and what are the things that are driving it. That has not risen to I have not seen that. I have not seen that as having a material impact.
Well, you know, I know most of the senators would agree with me. They like to have data when we weigh in on things, especially a big change like that. If you could provide some research on that as to the graduation rates, if it's affected it at all, if it's gone up, down, stayed the same. I would like to have that as at least something to base a decision on.
To be clear, the graduation rates are in the book.
I meant across the states that have already legalized it.
I'm sorry, again?
Across the states that have already legalized it. If you could,
okay. Yes,
it.
thank you. Okay, thank you. Absolutely.
All right. Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Senator Laughlin. Senator Haywood, followed by Senator Vogt.
Thank you. A couple quick questions. Good to see you again. Number one, could you share with us or do the research to let us know what would be the cost or I guess the adjusted cost for the decades of documented historic racial discrimination that affected Cheyney University? If we want to restore Cheyney University to compensate it for the decades of historic race discrimination, I'd like to know what that number would be. So as we look at how we adjust capital and other costs, we account for what's been taken away. Is that something that could be achieved?
So we can and we have looked at the sort of historic funding pattern to Cheyney, both in terms of dollars out the door, capital, as well as state appropriated dollars. And then we can adjust by the size of the student body. So we can do that, and that has been done.
I appreciate that. I think the historic race discrimination against Cheney needs to be taken into account as we look at the future. My second question is with respect to the conversation I had a couple of days ago with respect to the median income in Pennsylvania. And we looked at the median income for Pennsylvanians. It was lower than all the surrounding states, with the exception of Ohio. And I'm wondering to what extent the redesign that you're developing will help to improve the median income of Pennsylvanians so that we will be able to say the income levels of people in our state are growing. Individuals are more able to have income and there's family sustaining as a result of the higher investment into higher education. We need to move the median income up in Pennsylvania. You may have seen recent stories about the number of Pennsylvanians that are struggling. Obviously, we want to reduce that. How will the redesign help everyday Pennsylvanians trying to make it?
So on pages 19 and 20 of the book, you'll see that we've presented data on the return on investment that our students get, what their income is if they go into different programs, and also the extent to which they tend to hang out, stay, and work and live in Pennsylvania. The return on investment is good. It's calculated in terms of salary and also net present value, so and it's all good. That's good. I think a lot of the result, though, is going to reflect some of the choices that we're going to make together. There are equity issues at play here. In today's society, Pennsylvania as well as the rest of the nation, the more you learn, the more you earn. It just is. And there are significant attainment gaps between different groups of people. Rural populations are almost twice as, are half as likely as urban populations to get a degree. Low income are 5 times less likely to get some form of college degree by age 24 than high-income students. And there are significant gaps, and they're all published in this book as well, by race, ethnicity. The economics of higher education are not super complicated, right? The extent to which there is support in public higher education from public entities will be reflected in the price that students pay. And the price that students pay will determine who is able to have access to that education. And I'm not doing anything to take anything away from the cost side because you're absolutely right. It's a partnership. Our part of that partnership is to operate with ruthless efficiency to deliver the most affordable, the highest quality, the most career-relevant education, and to be agile and to move as the market moves, right? But ultimately, addressing those equity issues, that is a policy issue. It will be a policy issue which determines the shape and the nature of the funding. And that is not me advocating for the Pennsylvania state system. I will take my chancellor's robes off for a moment and make a policy recommendation as a policy guy. I'll put my robes back on.
Thank you.
Thank you, Senator Haywood. Senator Vogel, followed by Senator Killian.
Good morning, Mr. Chancellor. How are you doing today? Good. A lot has been talked about here this morning about tuition and tuition costs and things like that, but I think the other side of the equation that needs to be talked about is graduation rates. I mean, I know the state relateds have been doing a lot in the last few years to really keep the graduation rates to 4 years, and I think that directly ties into tuition costs. How is the state system making out as far as graduation rates 4, 5, 6 years? What is the rates and where are we at?
So our average graduation rate across the system is about 60%. That is in line with our national peer group. I'm seeing some really positive early indicators, and that's really based on the fine work that our universities have done before I got here, so I'm not going to claim credit for that. Our presidents have led with real courage in focusing on, I'm going to call at-risk student populations, and we're beginning to see the numbers change in things like first to second year retention rates, in things like, this is pretty geeky, I know, but number of course completions per student, per semester.
That all counts. I mean, that all
counts.
That all counts. That's part of the deal. I mean,
and
yeah.
It's a leading indicator that suggests to me that lagging indicators like graduation rates are going to improve. Yeah.
Yeah, I agree. Like I said, I think that's a monumental thing when you talk about tuition costs. If you can't graduate in 4 years and you drag it out to 5 or 6 for whatever reasons, you just add another $15,000 or $20,000 to your student debt. Why? It doesn't matter. I mean, and also I want to tie on with what Senator Dinniman said about the money from the Horse Race Development Fund. I mean, being chairman of the Senate Ag Committee, I'm getting beat up every day on this issue. I mean, and it's a great policy issue, and I agree. You know, something needs to be done to help these students as far as being able to pay their debt and things like that. You know, but I don't know if this is something that's going to happen anytime soon. Like he said as well. You know, I mean, it's a great idea, but whether it happens or not today, tomorrow, next year, or the next year after that, I have no idea. You know, because obviously it's just an issue that we made a deal with the horse racing people years ago, and the money that's in that fund is to be used for things in the horse racing industry and the state agriculture departments and things like that. But also, I want to go back to another thing. You said 60% of the working age Pennsylvanians have to have a post-secondary degree or credentials by 2025. That was how close are we to those numbers, and are those attainable? Or I mean, I don't know where we're at.
The bad news is the Lumina report, I think, says 2020. We need it now. So, and here's what really kind of freaks me out, if I can use the colloquial expression. If we give ourselves the arbitrary deadline of let's get this done by 2025, that suggests a compound annual growth rate in the number of credentials being produced by every single college and university in this state of 8% a year, year on year. 8% a year. How many of you know an institution which is increasing its credential rate 8% a year, year on year? I do not know one.
No,
this is, and this is going to show up in our ability to attract. I mean, again, the economics of higher education are not complicated. Industries come for a talent pool. Students who are laden with debt buy homes and cars and marry later in life. It impacts their consumer behavior and ultimately our economy. So, you know, again, that goes back to last week's discussion. These are the kind of policy choices we're facing. I understand that my role is to do everything I can to transform this system so that it serves the need of this state. And I am working with some courageous leaders in my faculty and my administration and on our councils of trustees and our board to do exactly that. But we can only solve the part of the problem that we can solve. And the rest is up to the General Assembly. Higher education, public higher education, is a partnership. The nature of that partnership will have real and lasting impact on the future of this Commonwealth. And your state system, at least so long as I am head of it as its CEO, will go in whatever direction you decide you wish to go for the people of this state.
Where are we at today as far as the 60%?
We're moving backwards. The credentialing productivity of our state's colleges and universities is traveling at negative 1.2% a year.
So 25 isn't even close to being real then.
And we need those now. And we don't just need them in VOTEC and the trades, we need them there too.
Yeah.
We did not lose Amazon's location because we have a super well-developed workforce in the sector that they serve.
Thank you, sir. I appreciate that and look forward to working with you in the future. Thank you. Thank you, Chairman.
Senator Killian.
Thank you, and good to see you, Chancellor. You know, we're talking about the universities that are struggling, and some of them in rural areas, not your centers of population. It's obviously not the case for Cheney University in my district. It sits in two municipalities, Thornburg, Delaware County, Thornburg, Chester County, probably about 35 minutes from downtown Philadelphia, 30 minutes from Wilmington, sits between two county seats, Media Borough, Delaware County seat of Delaware County, and Westchester, where Westchester University is in Andy Dinniman's district, which is literally practically right down the street from Cheney University, and also the county seat for Chester County. You mentioned trying to take advantage in public-private partnerships with the excess land. As you know, Cheney has plenty of excess land, very valuable. I mean, it is literally, and you put a house on that property, it's worth easily $700,000, $800,000. So what can we do? You mentioned one of the obstacles is that we own that ground. It's state-owned. What can we do as a legislative body to free your hands so that we can get around that barrier to put in public-private partnerships, bringing industry onto that campus to work with the students and then provide jobs for them upon graduation?
Anything you can do to relax the regulatory environment that surrounds our use of state-owned land and buildings.
I look forward to working with you and some of my colleagues on that, because, I mean, that would be an easy part of the solution to solving the Cheney problem. Thank you.
Thank you, Senator Killian. We have, we're over time here. We have requests for a second round. I'm going to ask the members to limit their inquiry to one question so that we can finish in relatively short order here. Hopefully by 12:30. So we'll start with Senator Dinniman, then Senator Scavella.
I went back to check on the steps. All I want to do, I'm not arguing the contract. I'm simply saying that this body needs to know exactly what the amount is. And it is 4.5%, but in each year of the contract, there are steps. And everyone goes up a step based on longevity. The first step already took place in December 2020. Under the contract, there's a second step in December 2021, and the third step in December of 2022. Because if you remember, my concern was, if money is going to the central administration, how can a university and not going to each university, how are these costs to be covered? So I want to say that the 4.5% figure is not an accurate figure in terms of the total cost that each university will have. You yourself said that there were $7 million short based on the fact that you negotiated this contract before or your budget was put together before the negotiated contract. Now, add on to that if I understand your charge correctly, you're saying that we'll save X amount of money by X number of people retiring. Your first attempt to get retirements failed because it wasn't adequate enough to encourage people to retire. Your second attempt has only 12 days left. And if I understand it right, only 114 of the 200 faculty needed to put the second stage into effect have come forth. And there's no guarantee that the others are going to come forth. So my argument simply is to ask you once again, if this figure of 4.5 is only part and it does not, I can assure you, because I've checked with different institutions between when we talked last, it does not include the steps. First given, two more coming, one in December, second one of 2020, 2021 is second in 2022. It also then doesn't deal with other increases in costs which each of these institutions have. So the problem is the money goes to the central system for a computer system that's supposed to save money, but as Senator Martin mentioned, one size doesn't fit all. But the basic question is this: how are the institutions that are trying to survive going to survive unless and how do we get an accurate indication of what is going to cost each campus for this contract, and how do we find out what program would work to get faculty to retire, because what you're doing now doesn't work, and when you put it in your charts that's going to take care of us, it's not taking care of anything right now. So that's my question, and I just want, Mr. Chairman, I simply want us to get the facts so we know what we're doing. and get the numbers. And that's all I'm trying to ask. If you can't provide it today, then get it to Chairman Brown and Chairman Hughes. So that's the question.
Why don't we leave it there? I would prefer that we don't go back and forth with.
No, I would agree. I think if we get adequate facts, and if that chart will be revised, even based on how many people are going to retire, since no one's left yet, and there's only 12 more days before next year.
Respond back to our office regarding a response to Senator Dinniman's information.
And the faculty contract doesn't have steps until 21-22.
All right, so we can reconcile this then?
I appreciate that,
Senator
Senator Brown. I appreciate that, Mr. Chancellor.
All right, thank you. Senator Scavella, followed by Senator Morton.
Chancellor, you quoted 47% nationally, we're 47th. When you take the $400 million in FEA grants that goes back to our students, I'm sure that number is going to drop substantially.
Oh, it's included.
You have that in that 47.
These data are provided by a national agency, and they include all state funds.
Okay. I just wanted to,
One question, Senator Scavella.
Well, this is a comment.
All right.
Staffing levels, and I just want to talk about what we did here at the Commonwealth. In 2003, we had 79,447 employees. Today, and especially under the last 3 years, we're at 72,642. We made adjustments at the state because we don't create the jobs. The jobs are created by the public sector.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you, Senator Scavella. Senator Morton.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. On the deal that was struck with the administration in middle states, does that deal put Cheney in a financial position that at the end of this fiscal year, beginning of the next fiscal year, we're not going to be faced with the same thing with IGTs having to be needed or acceleration of the appropriation and things like that?
So I believe that to be true. Cheney talk about transformation. Cheney is on a transformational path, which is tricky and narrow, but I understand it. It has to do with the utilization of land and buildings to generate alternative revenue streams and allow the university to remain small in terms of its enrollments. So that's all good. This year, I'm looking, there's a number of contingencies, but yeah, I'm pretty certain if they continue to draw down their money from the DOE, I'm pretty certain that they will actually get through the year in the shape that they hope to, which is with a positive balance in their budget.
Thank you, Senator Morton. Senator Hughes.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, Chancellor. No way I'm going to be doing one question, but I know the Chairman already knows that. I've been with this system since it was born. Mm-hmm. Okay, I've been with the system since it was born. Started with my father, James Hughes, and I believe there's a building on the systems campus named after my father. He and Fitz Dixon served there and originated the entire system from its inception. When it was an idea in Governor Thornburg's brain and those individuals around him, he appointed my father to be part of the original committee to study it, and then part of the original Board of Governors. And I believe he served on the Board of Governors for 18 years. I heard lots of conversations about the system when I was still living at home. And then when I moved out and came to Harrisburg, took on that responsibility here. Served on the Board of Governors for about 15 years. And still currently reside as a trustee on Cheney University, at Cheney University. There's a lot of things I want to go through. I keep, as I said in my beginning comments, that the members of this committee, if they have not had the opportunity to review your report that you provided for the Higher Education Commission, they need to take it and look deeply at what it is that you laid out as far as higher education in general. It wasn't a system-directed report, it was about higher education in general. I hope members understand and listen closely at your comment about how we're lagging behind, dramatically lagging behind, the number of degreed individuals that need to be in place to accommodate the jobs that are currently in existence in 2020, okay? I hope members pay close attention to that. And again, this whole redesign, and I'm talking redesign in a broad sense, not just in a system sense, of how we redesign higher education, is on us. It's on us. It's on the people in this room. All right? We make the decisions. We drive the funding. We drive the policy. It is on us. And I'm going to use us in the context of some history and the decisions that I was going to say us's have made, but we have made, or the bad decisions that we have made. In 2005 and 2006, the total appropriation for the state system of higher education was $465 million. In fact, I believe it's Appendix B5. It's in your book, page number 5, Appendix B5. 2005, 2006, the total appropriation for our state-owned system. Let's get clear. This is our state-owned system. This is not Penn's system. This is not Drexel's system. This is not CMU's, Carnegie Mellon University system. This is not Duquesne's system. This is not Penn State. It's not Temple. It's not Pitt. It's not Lincoln. It's our state-owned system. Total appropriations, $465 million. If it's our state-owned system, then we have to take responsibility for the condition that it's in. We can't blame it on anyone else. $465 million. 15 years later, the projected appropriation for the system, current 2019, 2020, the appropriation for the system is $477 million. That's a $12 million increase. $12 million increase from 2005 to 2019, 2020. So you want to understand why the system might be in the condition that it's in right now? Over a 15-year period, we and Governor Rendell, Governor Ridge, Governor Corbett, previous Governor Casey. I'm using all my history, okay? All right? And Governor Wolf, Governor Corbett, we collectively have made that decision about our state-owned system. So let's not look to the hills. Let's not look somewhere else. Let's not look around the bend or what the issue is. A $12 million increase in 15 years. I did some quick, this is not a napkin, but we did some quick math back here with some of my fine staff. One is a Millersville graduate, right here, Lisa. Where are you? Shippensburg? Mm-hmm. Shippensburg graduate. You're Penn State, right? Okay, that's okay. All right, and then we have a nice young intern, Ahmad Denor, who is currently a junior at Lock Haven University, wave high. All right. But we did some quick math back here. If there had been a 2% increase, I'm not talking about 10% increase, I'm not talking about 5% increase, I'm not talking about 4%, a 2% increase in appropriations to the system beginning in 2005, 2006, the appropriation right now would be $613 million. Decisions were made to either invest or not to invest. If there had been a simple 2% increase, standard 2% increase between 2005 and 2020, the appropriation for the system would be $613 million. I dare say, Mr. Chancellor, you'd have a lovely time doing all kinds of creative and exciting things with the system at an appropriation of $613 million. 2% a year. That's all. That's all. That's all, just 2%. So we put those numbers out in context. So as we view and have this conversation, we must also understand how we got to where we are right now and how we're dealing with this issue of the fact that we're below the number of degreed workers that we need to have because somebody made the decision not to invest in the degree-producing institutions. Now, no one on this panel has the level of longevity that I have, so most of you can excuse yourself from having that responsibility because you weren't around. But I remember why the system was created. And the system was created to be supportive of one another, to have 14 universities captured by the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania in a supportive environment so that they can help one another when needed and benefit from one another when needed as well. It's not a system where if you have, you get more. It's a system that if you need it, the system would help you, and in helping you, wind up being a benefit to someone else. Cheney University was helped because the other 13 institutions didn't want black students. So the one institution, aside from Lincoln University, all right, the one institution, aside from Lincoln University, that was part of the system that had that responsibility, has a special place. And in fact, the designated funds, especially the Keystone Honors Program, was negotiated under and by Governor Ridge, Republican governor, at the direction of the U.S. Department of Education. One of the benefits of being around for a little bit. All right? So now, I just wanted to make sure that folks understood that. Mr. Chancellor, you said at our last conversation in this environment about a year or so ago that Aaron Walton was the best public higher education president in the country. Yes, you
I say
did.
best or most innovative?
You said best.
Okay.
I got it on tape.
I go either way.
And you were right, and still are. The president, made the decision that most presidents never make. I got to cut this program, I got to cut this program, I got to cut this program, I got to cut that program because I have been directed, President Walton said, I have been directed by the Board of Governors and a subcommittee by the Board of Governors to reduce the expenditures of the university so that you get small to get large. So you cut the football team, you cut this program, you cut that program. You take folks who are not working and you make the hard decision, and it's hard, all right? And none of the previous presidents at Cheney wanted to make those decisions. And most of the presidents at most of the other universities don't want to make those decisions either. I know it, because we know it. It's easier to walk away or do something else or avoid, or as you said, Chancellor, to kick the ball down the road than to make the hard decisions. But Aaron Walton made those hard decisions. Mm-hmm. And in terms of monetizing the campus, he's constructed 4 public-private partnerships where 4 companies, some national in scope, are residing on Cheney's campus and working with Cheney's students to provide opportunities, and there is a monetary benefit from each one of those relationships going to the university. 4 direct agreements in place, 3 letters of intent have been signed. So, that's innovation. That's innovation. And just like we all do as parents, you eat your spinach, and I'll give you some ice cream. To our kids, right? You do the penance, and as a result of the penance, you get a benefit. Senator Dinniman is a professor. You do your homework, you get an A, right? So he made the tough decisions, cutting the programs that needed to be cut, traveling around the country to raise the money.
He did.
And as a result of that, this state, this governor stood beside him.
Amen.
Is it perfect? No, it's not perfect. Is it still work? Yes, it still work. But who's benefited from this? There's an enrollment increase in 2019 of 31% at Cheney University. Paid deposits for fall of 2020 are up 45%. Right now, as opposed to last year. Retention, as you mentioned, Mr. Chancellor, is up to 70% of freshman students are coming back, the highest it's been in 25 years. It's balanced its budget in 2019, the first time since 2011, and as I said, the public-private partnerships are in place. Now, I'm not going to put words in your mouth, but I would imagine some of those tough decisions that were made on campus in a very rough and tumble time frame. I'm sure some of the other presidents, and I don't want to put words in your mouth, Mr. Chancellor, but I'm sure you would like some other presidents and folks at these other universities to make some of those hard decisions too. To realize the environment that they're in and make those hard decisions. And by the way, just as a point of fact for the members and anyone who's paying attention, Cheney University is the only university in the state system, and you mentioned this, Senator Dinniman,
yes,
that has a neighboring system university 6 miles away. So the issue of competition stares Cheney University in the face every day.
Correct.
But somebody saw the importance and the need of the oldest HBCU in the nation and chose not to walk away from it, but to walk towards it.
Correct.
No other university in the system has a competing institution, state system institution, within 6 miles. I think somebody said here earlier the average distance is about 50 miles from one another. Which makes it interesting if you're a senior at a system university and you only need one class to graduate, only one class to graduate, and you're a senior and that class is not being offered on campus, where do you go to get that class? Do you have to add another semester so that class is then returned? Or do you have to travel 50 miles to get to another university to take that class? Think about it. These are tough decisions. And we've got to own it. We've got to own it. So, Chancellor, as you might expect, I don't have any questions for you. All right? I don't. People have got to read this report if they're interested in higher education in Pennsylvania, if they're interested in the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania, and tough decisions are going to have to be made, and they're going to have to be made around the issue of appropriate investment. To be $12 million ahead of where we were 15 years ago. You want to know why students make decisions to go to college? We talk about the affordability issue. If there's no affordability, if you can't afford it, you don't go. And if we look at the reality of most of Pennsylvania's students, or most of this nation's students, their income and their family income has pretty much been stagnant for 30 to 40 years. There's no extra money, and nobody's donating to a huge scholarship fund. So I don't have any questions for you.
Thank you,
You're
Senator.
free.
Can I just, two minutes to build on your comments?
Yes.
So one of them, and you know this, it's in the report. The workforce development, that 47-60 gap, you cannot close it. It's a math problem. You cannot close it on the back of people who can afford higher education, people like my kids. You cannot. You will only close that gap on the basis of service to low-income students, students of color, and increasingly adults. There's just not enough wealthy people left in the state to close that gap. These are the historic populations that the Pennsylvania state system and its universities were built to serve. Thing one. Thing two, to the work that President Walton did. When I talked about the sustainability policy in my opening remarks and the difficult decisions, the instructions that I gave my presidents to take actions, I did that after a meeting with my presidents looking over our sustainability plans that I have to tell you gave me goosebumps. Being a CEO in a system is a pretty lonely job. But on that day, there was a general recognition amongst my leadership, our leadership, that we had to work together to put our arms around one another to solve the problems that we have to face together. That this model where we can each be one tub on its own bottom and forget the rest doesn't work for any of us, the haves, the have-nots, or the have-somes. What we have effectively done is to scale the lessons that President Walton learned at Cheney over the last couple of years so that other universities can pivot before they find themselves in a position where they need a heroic gesture on the part of a governor or anyone else. Thank you.
Thank you, and thank you, Senator Hughes. I've been doing this for 25 years, not as long as Senator Hughes, but that historical perspective and that institutional knowledge is very important as a foundation for where we're going, to know where we started and to respect that in terms of our path to the future. And I think it's going to come up in several regards this year, not only the state system, but in charter reform and what the original intention of that was. It's going to be talked about in terms of the Horse Race Development Fund. What was the original purpose of that? And what was the understanding going in? To know where we're going in the future, to have that respect for where we started. And it seems like, based on what you just mentioned, system presidents coming together to solve a collective problem is the foundation on which the system originally started, as a collective effort for the higher education needs of Pennsylvania students. So the longer I get here, the more I'm personally sensitive to those discussions, and to know that there are reasons why we do things, and if we're going to move forward, they have to respect the foundations from the past. Now that they have an opportunity to look to the future, it's important to also keep the financial considerations of the past in context and perspective, so that we understand why we did them, and everyone has a sense of why the decisions were made where they were, and it was a collective decision, as Senator Hughes had said. Our financial period over the last 10 years was the most difficult financial period that state government has experienced. No one is in this building or is around to remember the last time that was more difficult than that. And there's a lot of components of state government that are not where they were in 2010. Our Commerce Department is a $150 million department now. It was a $600 million department back then. And we had, the decisions were made based on the collective determination that in a very challenged economy, it is a very difficult time. And I'm not saying this, I'm pretty confident this is not only something that was made here, but it's also made in Washington at the time too. The Obama administration at the time did not believe, like we did, that raising taxes at the federal level, just like raising them here, was something that would put our state or our nation on an appropriate trajectory to recover. And sacrifices were made as a result of that. And investments in higher education were a part of that conversation. If we collectively decided that those key economic development investments, as seen in the decades before that, were going to be maintained or increased, it would have required us to ask our citizens to pay more in personal income tax. There was no other way around that. So that's the context of where we are in the past. But now we can look to the future. And I think that's the foundation for this conversation now. And not only this discussion today, but the Higher Ed Funding Commission discussion we had last week gives me, at least me, a lot of positive thoughts about where we're going. Seems like we have a plan at least to execute going forward. The word that I hope that we can continue to use is partnership. I'm always expressing a need to be fully transparent on revenue and expense because I see this as a partnership towards the future of Pennsylvania that plays the challenges of the state system playing out in the overall challenges of Pennsylvania. If you look at our financial picture, and I'm going to be a broken record on this year because we need to really reflect on where we are. That if you look at Pennsylvania in terms of a business cycle, we hit maturity around 2008, and now we're in a situation where we have to decide whether we're going to decline or we're going to renew. And the first group in here was the IFO that spelled it out, and that is the demographic that needs to be our most productive demographic is dropping from 21 to 55. And if we don't find a way to reverse that so that we have more people with degrees to fill the jobs that will produce productivity, to allow our revenue to grow, to pay the obligations we all want to pay, the state of Pennsylvania will not be in that fork in the road between decline and renewal. We're going towards decline and not renewal. The best thing we have going for us is our system of higher education. I believe it's our strongest asset that's already in place that we can use to take the right fork in that road. And the plan that you put before us for a system redesign to get us along that path is something we have to take really seriously. What I'm asking, at least in my capacity, is if your request for investments in these three different components, which make a lot of sense to me for the future of the system, the Shared Services Consortium, the Student Information System, a Student Success Center, that we stay engaged along the timeline of implementation on a very regular basis so we can understand how things are happening and hopefully, pivot accordingly in our capacity, not just once a year, right? This once a year report in a partnership, given what challenges we have, I don't believe is enough. So hopefully you can honor that in your consideration. That's something we can get together as a committee, myself, Senator Hughes, and the rest of the body, and whoever wants to be in that, and decide where we're going in the future if we need to pivot from that plan. But I see this as no less significant than whether Pennsylvania's future is going to be one of renewal or decline. And I think this committee, along with you, is having the right conversations to move in that direction. I'm hopeful that the parallel discussion we're having in the Higher Ed Funding Commission can be integrated into this. Frankly, I think it's some of the most interesting conversations we've had in this building in a long time because our path on funding for higher education has been pretty boring. Even if it's more or less, it's just that. There's no thought to it. It's if we have revenue available and we can decide to spend more in higher education, it ends there. And now we have to construct a model that's going to work along with a system that's going to be nimble and effective for the future. And your expertise along that road in terms of recommendations we need to consider to make sure that works is also important. So I know we're way above time. I really appreciate, Chancellor, your focus and your vision, and look forward to working with you as we move forward towards the success of our collective efforts. So thank you.
Chairman, thank you.
We will break until 1:30, where we'll meet with officials of the Department of State.